Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. In the village of Longbourn, the Bennet household has 5 unmarried daughters, oldest to youngest Jane, Elizabeth, Mary, Kitty, and Lydia. Mrs. Bennet has badly been looking for suitors for her daughters. When the news of a young wealthy man named Charles Bingley has rented the manor of Netherfield Park, people start getting excited, and none more than the Bennets. Mr. Bennet visits Charles to introduce himself, and later the family attends a ball that Charles is at. Charles fancies Jane and spends much of the ball dancing with her. Charles' close friend, Mr. Darcy, is also at the ball. Seemingly annoyed by the event, he refuses a dance with Elizabeth, and everyone makes him out to be arrogant and stuck up. As the two see each other more over the next few weeks, Mr. Darcy begins to fall for Elizabeth's charm and intelligence. At the same time, Charles and Jane also get closer. One day, Jane visits Charles at his mansion. On her visit, she is caught in the rain and falls ill. She is forced to stay several days at Netherfield. Elizabeth hikes daily through the muddy fields to get to Netherfield and tend to Jane. Miss Bingley, Charles' sister, does not like Elizabeth coming around, and her dislike grows as she notices Mr. Darcy, who she likes, is keen for her. Elizabeth and Jane eventually return home and find Mr. Collins visiting their family. Mr. Collins is a young clergyman who is set to inherit the Bennets' property because property can only be passed down to men. Mr. Collins is an unintelligent know-it-all. However, he is very interested in the Bennet girls and asks Elizabeth to marry him, but she turns him down. Later, the girls are hanging with some militia officers they have befriended from a neighboring town. Wickham, a young handsome soldier, tells Elizabeth how Darcy stole inheritance from him. As winter arrives, the Bingleys and Darcy leave Netherfield. This disappoints Jane, but even more unexpectedly, Elizabeth finds out that her best friend Charlotte Lucas and Mr. Collins have gotten engaged. Charlotte is the poor daughter of a knight and tells Elizabeth the marriage is for financial reasons. In the middle of winter, Jane visits London to see her friends, hoping she may run into Mr. Bingley. However, Miss Bingley visits her and is very rude. Mr. Bingley never visits her at all, and the Bennet girls' opportunities for marriage are dwindling. In the spring, Elizabeth visits Charlotte, who lives with Lady Catherine de Bourgh, who is Darcy's aunt. One day, Darcy visits his aunt and encounters Elizabeth. In hopes to continue to see her, Darcy makes several more visits. Eventually, he makes a surprising proposal of marriage, but Elizabeth refuses. She tells him he is arrogant and unpleasant. She also tells him it was wrong for him to steer Bingley away from Jane and steal Wickham's inheritance. Darcy leaves, but later writes Elizabeth a letter. He states that he urged Bingley away from Jane because their relationship was not serious, and that Wickham is a liar, and that their real disagreement was revolving around Wickham's attempt to elope with his younger sister, Georgiana Darcy. The letter makes Elizabeth rethink her feelings for Darcy. She returns home and refuses to speak to Wickham, who is leaving town with the militia. Lydia manages to get permission to spend the summer in Brighton in hopes to see the militia boys again. As June approaches, Elizabeth takes a trip with the Garniers, who are relatives. The trip takes her north to Pemberley, the town where Darcy's estate is. Once she knows Darcy is away, she visits the grounds and is delighted with the landscape and buildings. She listens to Darcy's workers talk about how he is a wonderful and generous master. Unexpectedly, Darcy returns home and treats Elizabeth respectfully. He entertains the Garniers and introduces Elizabeth to his sister. A letter soon arrives from home with the shocking news that Lydia has eloped with Wickham and that they are nowhere to be found, suggesting they may be living together out of wedlock. Knowing the disgrace this could bring on her family, Elizabeth and the Garniers hurry home. Mr. Bennet and Mr. Garnier head out to look for the couple. Mr. Bennet returns home unsuccessful, but they get a letter a few days later saying Mr. Garnier has found the couple and Wickham has agreed to marry Lydia in exchange for an annual income. The Bennets are convinced Mr. Garnier has paid off Wickham, but Elizabeth finds out that the money came from Darcy. Now married, Wickham and Lydia return to Longbourn, but people are still unhappy with their stunt. They eventually depart to the north of England to this new assignment. A few days later, Bingley arrives back in Netherfield and resumes his romance with Jane. Darcy visits him and the Bennets, but has no plans to propose to Elizabeth. However, Bingley proposes to Jane to the delight of all except Bingley's sister. While the family celebrates, Lady Catherine de Bourgh pays a visit to them. She takes Elizabeth aside and says if Darcy proposes, she must refuse, as she does not believe a Bennet to be a suitable partner. Elizabeth refuses, and a few days later, Darcy proposes to her, in which she accepts. The story ends with both Jane and Elizabeth marrying. Please like and subscribe to support the channel.